Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to make use of Angular 17 as well as the GitHub OAuth service in Supabase to create an authentication service. So currently, as you can see on the browser, we have a button that says sign in with GitHub, and once we click on this button, we'll get navigated to a dashboard, and within this dashboard we're going to have access to the GitHub object, and one of the objects contains an important information such as the name, and you can see this on the top right side of the navbar, which contains the name of my GitHub account. So with this, we are going to have access to the dashboard by making use of the GitHub OAuth service available to us in Supabase. So another thing we can do is we have access to log out from the dashboard by clicking on the logout button, which logs us out immediately from the dashboard. And if we want to access the dashboard, we need to click on the sign in with GitHub button once again. So that's what we'll be doing in today's tutorial. If you are new to the channel, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe and share with your friends. And with that, let's get started with this tutorial. Quick pause. Recently, I partnered with Newline to create a new online course focusing on Angular signals. As you all know, signals is the new rave of the moment when it comes to the world of Angular. In this course, you learn how to surgically manage states and optimize UI rendering with Angular signals. Also in this course, you get to learn how to manage states in an Angular application by making use of signals. You get to learn the importance of using signals to enhance change detection, how to integrate a robust lazy loading approach by making use of deferrable views and lazy loaded routes, differentiate between using RxJS and signals when working with data and asynchronous operations. You also learn how to structure an Angular application using standalone components, and also how to work with the newly built-in control flows in Angular. At the end of this course, you get to build a modern shopping cart application, as you can see on the slider on this page. Also, you can get to preview the course content in this course by checking out the course syllabus. You can see we have 5 intense modules, starting with the introduction, then we gradually move down to getting started with signals, and after that we work with signals and HTTP requests and how to share data between different components with signals. At the end of the day, we wrap everything we've done so far in the last module of the course, and you can get this course for a fair price of 39 USD for a one-time fee. And by purchasing this course, you have additional benefits such as a dedicated Discord community, where if you have any issues or any questions around the course, I'll be sure to answer you personally on that. And also you have access to full transcripts. Also, you have money back guarantee in case you want to not purchase the course anymore, which I'm sure you are not going to do. So if you are looking for a quality resource on signals in Angular, this is the #1 course I would recommend you to get. You can purchase it for yourself and also purchase it for your friends who are in the Angular community looking to upgrade on their signals knowledge. You can see the link to this course in the description box below on YouTube. And with that, let's head back to the tutorial. So to get started with this tutorial, we are going to create a new Angular project by making use of the command ng-new and then the name of the project, which we are going to call ng-gallery. So I'm going to press enter, and one thing to take note of is in Angular 17, the components come as standalone by default. So that means every component we are going to be creating for this project is going to set standalone flag as true. So we can now select the style sheets format we want. I'm going to go with the traditional CSS format, and it asks us if we want to enable server-side rendering. For this project, we don't need server-side rendering, so I'm going to say no and then press enter. So a new Angular project is going to get generated for us. As you can see, our project has just finished generating all the necessary folders and files. So I need to cd into the project directory, so I'm just going to type in the cd command and then the name of the project, which is called ng-gallery. And inside of this directory, I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio Code by typing in code and then dot. So this opens up in our Visual Studio Code, and we can see all the structure of our Angular project. So the next thing I'm going to do is to install Supabase. So let's start off by installing Supabase, and to install Supabase, I'm just going to run npm install at supabase/supabase.js, and that's the command for installing the Supabase package. And while that is installing, I think we have an error somewhere. This is not dot, this is dash, not dot. So I think I made that error right there. So it's supabase-js. So while that is installing, I'm going to head straight to the browser and then grab the CDN for Bootstrap 5, since the design framework we're using for this project is called Bootstrap. So I'm going to grab the CSS CDN and then paste it inside of the head section of the index.js file, as we have it right here. I'm also going to grab the JavaScript bundle as well. So I'm just going to copy that and head straight to the body section and paste in the script. So I'm going to save and then close this particular file. Another thing we need to do is to create a new Supabase project. What do I mean by this? With the current projects we have, I would like to create it from scratch so you have a deeper understanding on how to set this up. So what I need to do is to create a new project under this current organization. So all you need to do to follow along is to sign up on Supabase using your GitHub account and then create a new organization. Once your organization is created, then you can now get to this stage where you need to create a new project. So for the project's name, I'm going to call it ng gallery, and then the database is asking for a password. I'm just going to generate a password using the Bitwarden package installed on my Chrome browser. So I'm going to paste it in, and then I'm going to select a region. I think the Europe region is kind of closer to my locality, so this helps to reduce latency. And then I'm going to click on create new project. So that's all we need to create a new project. So while the project is creating, another thing we can do is to check on our package, which is the Supabase package. Let's check the current version getting installed. So as of this tutorial, we have Supabase version 2.39 currently installed. So depending on when you are watching the tutorial, you need to take note of that version. And as you can see, for our Angular project, everything is showing version 17. So we also have the latest version of Angular. So you're in the right place for all the latest updates on all the technologies. So I'm going to close the package.json file and then generate the environment file, because we would need to set up the environment variable in a moment. So to do that, all I need to do is just run ng generate environment and then press enter. In previous versions of Angular, the environment folder comes by default, but for Angular 17 and I think also for Angular 16 and 15, it needs to be generated on your end. So we now have the environment folder right here. So that is cool. So the next thing we need to do is to try to get the URL, that is the project URL, to set it up in our environment file. So to do that, all I need to do is to head straight to Supabase once more, and then I'm going to scroll to the settings. You can see the sidebar on the left. So under the project settings, we need to grab a couple of things. So I'm going to click on the API tab we have right here. So one of the first things we need to grab is the project URL as well as the public key, which we have right here. So I think this service role is more suited for the backend, but when it comes to client side integration, I think it's ideal to go with this non-public key we have right here, while this is more suited for when you have a backend like Node.js and the likes. So let's start off by grabbing the project URL. So I'm going to click on copy, head straight to the environments folder, and within the environment folder, I'm going to create a production key and set it to false, since our app is currently not in production. So this is going to be false. And then another thing is the app name. We can just give the app name probably ng gallery, just like we did while creating this application. Another setting we need to do, which is the most important one, is the Supabase setting. So I'm going to put this inside of an object. So I'm going to say Supabase, and then I'm going to create an object. Within the Supabase object, we're going to have the URL as well as the key. So as you can see, we have the URL and the key. So the first one is the URL which we copied previously. So I'm just going to paste it right here. As you can see, it ends with supabase.co, and then the key, I'm going to head back to the Supabase dashboard, and then I'm going to grab this unknown key we have right here, head straight to the environment file, and then paste it right in, then save. I think that's all we need to do in the environment development file. So I'm going to close that up. So the next step is to let's generate the two components we are going to use for this project. So we need the dashboard component and the sign up component. So I'm just going to run ng generate components, and it's going to be inside the components folder, and we're going to have the sign up component as well as the dashboard component. So I'm just going to run ng generate components / dashboard. So I'm just going to press enter. So we would have two components generated for us. So quickly, let's check the Visual Studio Code for each of the components generated. So it's going to be within the app directory. I'm going to open up the components, and as you can see, we have inside the components directory, we have the dashboard and the sign up. So that is cool. So the next step now is to set up the auth, the GitHub auth. I would like to grab the client and the client ID and the client secret. So what am I talking about? If I head straight to Supabase and I head to authentication, other authentication, if I go to providers, you can see the only thing enabled here is the email. So the next thing I want to enable is GitHub. So to enable GitHub, we need to have a client ID as well as a client secret. So first things first, let's enable GitHub, and then let's go to the GitHub page, my GitHub page specifically, to set this up. So I'm going to go to my GitHub page, and inside my GitHub page, I'm going to go to settings. So when you scroll down, you see settings right here. Just click on settings and you're good to go. And then once you're on the settings page, scroll down, select developer settings. So under developer settings, you have GitHub apps, you have OAuth apps, and you have personal access token. What you need right here is your OAuth app for authentication, making use of GitHub. For the sample tutorial I showed at the beginning of this project, it's called ng image, but I don't want to continue using this. I want to create this from scratch so you have an idea of how this is being created. So I'm going to click on new OAuth app. So for the new OAuth app, it's going to ask you for your application name. So you can just call this ng gallery. And then for the home page, basically the home page is going to be localhost 4200. So I can just paste that right here, localhost 4200, and then the description is optional. So because this is a educational content, we don't need to waste a lot of time on the description. Then one thing you need to notice is on the next input box is asking for our authorization callback URL. This is where Supabase come into play. So all you need to do is to go to Supabase and then grab this callback URL provided for us. Is meant for the auth authentication. So I'm just going to copy that, head straight to the GitHub dashboard, and then paste it in. And then that's all we need to do. So we need to just click on the register application button to have our application registered. So quickly, before we proceed, we need to grab the client ID and the client secret and paste it within these input fields in Supabase. So to do that, I don't know why GitHub isn't showing the client secret at first instance. So for whatever reason that is, I don't know, but for me to have access to it, I need to click on this generate a new client secret. So once I click on that, it asks for authentication because I'm using an authentication code to provide two-factor authentication for my application. So quickly, I need to grab the code from my phone. Now that the verification is complete, so what I need to do is to grab the client secret. So I'm going to copy this client secret, and then I'm going to paste it inside of this input field, and then grab the client ID as well. So that's all. Then we can now click on save, and then we're good to go. Our GitHub OAuth authentication is now fully configured successfully. So we can now move to the next step of this tutorial, which is to configure the OAuth service in our Angular project. For the OAuth service to be configured, we need to create a service folder. So to do that, I'm going to run the command ng generate service. and it's going to be inside the services folder, because we're going to have two services. We're going to have the authentication service as well as the gallery service. So the first one is the auth service. So I think I should probably create the second service while we're at it. So I'm going to run ng generate service. Under the services folder, we have the gallery service. So let's press enter and wait for these two folders to get generated. As you can see, the auth service has been generated for us. So within this folder, within the services folder, we can open up the auth service and then begin the integration of Supabase. So the first thing we need to do is to create an instance of the Supabase client. So to do that, all I need to do is to create a private variable by saying private Supabase, and then I'm going to call the Supabase client. So let's type in Supabase client, which as you can see gets imported above. So within the Supabase client, we're going to need some extra packages. For instance, we're going to need user as well as create client. And we have an error here that says initializer is not defined. So I'm just going to create an initializer by attaching an exclamation mark on top of, in front of that variable. So the next thing we need to do is within the constructor, we need to create the configuration of our Supabase. So let's reference the Supabase instance we created above by saying this.supabase is equals to create client, and within the create client is going to take in two variables. That is, it's going to take in the Supabase URL as well as the Supabase key, which we created in our environment variable folder. So what that means is we need to import those, but let's see if IntelliSense can help us with that. So I'm going to say environment, which is now imported above, thankfully, dot Supabase. So the first one is going to be the URL, so it's going to be dot URL, while the second argument we are going to have right there is environment dot Supabase dot key, and with that the create client has been configured. So next up is for us to try and track the state of the user. If the user is signed in, we want to implement a particular functionality. If the user is not signed in, we also want to implement another particular functionality. So what do I mean by this? We can just say this dot Supabase dot auth dot on auth state change, and then it's going to take a callback. So the callback has two variables. The first one is the event and then the session. So we're going to make use of the fat arrow to then return what we want to do with these two variables. So before we proceed, I'm just going to console log both. So I'm going to console log the event as well as the session, just to have an idea what it looks like in the console. So we can now create a condition that says if the event is equals to signed in. This is a response that is returned by Supabase by default. So it's not like we're coming up with this from our head. So we're going to say if event equals to signed in, or if event is equals to token refreshed, then we want to implement a particular functionality. So before we do that, I'm just going to pass in else. So in case if that is not the case, so I'm going to say else, then we want to integrate something else. So what we need to do next is to create a behavior subject. This allows us to persist the particular state of the user. So to integrate this behavior subject, we're going to create a new variable and say user is equals to new behavior subject, which we need to import, and then we're going to pass in the user from Supabase, and we're going to say or null, and we're going to take in, and it's going to take in null, just like you have it right here. So if you look above, we have behavior subjects imported for us. So now we can integrate the conditions for this particular event. So if the user is signed in and the token is refreshed, we can just say this dot user dot next, and then we're going to pass in the session. So I'm going to say session dot user. Then for the else, all we need to do is just to say this dot user dot next, and we're going to pass in null since the user is not signed in. So we don't have any session to persist for that particular user, since there's no user signed in anyways. So I think that's the right way to go about that. Another thing I would like to implement here, because further ahead we might have issues with it, is the router. So if the user exists, if the user already exists, I don't want the user to be seeing the login page. I think there are various ways of doing this in Angular. I could make use of the auth card to do this, but I think I would rather make use of the features provided by Supabase to handle this. So what I need to do is just to inject the router in our constructor. So I can just say private router and then import the router, the Angular router, just like we have it above. You can see we have the Angular router right here. So with the Angular router injected into our auth service file, we can just say this, not uppercase, this dot router dot navigate, and then we want to navigate to a particular page, that is the dashboard page, which we've not configured the router for this project. So immediately after this, let's go configure the router for the page so that we would not have issues when we forge ahead. So the last thing I would like to do before we go integrate the router is to create the 3 functions we are going to need. The first function is the sign out function. We have to also create the function to get the current user, and then finally we need to create a function to sign in with the GitHub OAuth service. So in fact, let's start with that. So I'm gonna say a sync sign in with GitHub. So within this function, we can just say await, because the GitHub response is asynchronous in nature. That's why we're making use of async await. So we can just say this dot supabase dot auth dot sign in with GitHub, or rather sign in with OAuth. So because the OAuth service has so many platforms, so we need to specify which OAuth service we're trying to sign in with. So I'm going to say provider is GitHub. So we're trying to sign in with GitHub. So I think that's pretty much clear. So that's all we need to do for the function to handle the authentication. So next up, let's just integrate the sign out function. So I'm going to say sync sign out. Within this, all we need to do is just say await this dot supabase dot auth dot sign out, and I'm going to pass in a parenthesis at the end. And finally, the get current user. I'm just going to make use of a getter and say get current user, and then within the get current user, I can just say return this dot user dot as observable, and then pass in the parenthesis. So that's all we need to do for the auth service. So we can now integrate this in our sign up component, but for now let's just deal with the router. So within the router file, we already have a minor configuration showing right here. So all we need to do is to implement it within this array. So this is going to be lazy loaded routes. So quickly we can just say paths, and then the first one we want to create is the dashboard route. So I'm just going to say dashboard, and the next thing is going to take is load component. So I'm just going to say load component, and it's going to return a callback, and we can just say import and then pass in the relative URL to that particular file. So all I need to do is just to say ./components, which is the component folder, and then dashboard/dashboard.component. Then it returns a promise, and then we can just say .then and then pass in a particular parameter, and then we have the fat arrow, and we can finally say the particular arguments within the promise dot the name of the component, which is the dashboard component. So with this, we've created the first lazy loaded route. So I think we need about 3 more routes to create. So the second route is going to be the sign up route. So I'm just going to replace this dashboard with sign up, and then in the imports, I'm just going to replace this dashboard with sign up, and then this is going to be sign up component. So we need to have a comma at the end of this bracket. So with that, we've created the sign up component. So now the home page for the project is going to be the sign up component. So all I need to do is just remove the path. So it's going to be an empty path. And in fact, we need to do the same for when the user is trying to access a wildcard component, that is a component that does not exist. So it's all going to be the sign up component. So I'm just going to replace everything with sign up. So let's just do that right here. Okay, I think there's an error. We didn't copy that properly. So I'm just going to grab it once more. Load components. This should be load components, and then same thing for the paths we have right here. So we can now save, and our route is now configured. So to proceed, we need to integrate the functions we create in our auth service file inside of our sign up file. So in the sign up file, what we need to do is to inject the auth service. So I'm going to make use of the constructor to do this. later on, I'm going to show you another way of injecting probably services into your components. But for now, I'm trying to make use of the traditional way. But by the time we start working with the gallery service, I'm going to make use of the injector to inject services into the component. So for now, let's just make use of the constructor, and we're going to say private auth, and then we're going to import the auth service. And then next up, let's create a function. I'm going to call this function undo auth. So all I need to do is to say undo auth, and then this function is just going to take in something simple. All we need to do is to create a variable. I'm just going to say const response is equals to await. Probably I need to add a sync here, since this is asynchronous. A sync, and then we can say await this dot auth dot sign in with GitHub. So I would need to, I like to console log the response. So I'm just going to say console.log response. I think we didn't spell the response properly, so it's going to be response. So I'm going to save, and I think we've not created the user interface for this particular component. So in the HTML, all we need to do is to make use of some Bootstrap 5 classes. So I'm just going to say div, and then make use of some classes like I'm going to make use of the form dash outline class in Bootstrap 5, and then I'm going to make use of margin bottom. That's going to be 3. I'm going to make use of a container class, as well as display flex, and then let's align items to center. So I'm going to make use of align items dash center to center every item within this div. And then finally, let's make use of the justify content center. So I'm going to say justify dash content dash center, and let's also make use of margin top. So I'm going to set that to 5, and we'll press enter. So that's all the services we need. And then we're going to create a form tag. Probably that's not really necessary, but let's just have that showing. We don't need the action attributes for this. And then within the form tag, we can have the button tag, and this is where we call the function by making use of the click event handler. So I'm just going to say handle auth right here, and within the button we can just say sign up with GitHub, and then let's add a class so that our button is going to look somewhat like a button. So we can just say btn dash outline dash secondary. So, and then we can have a button type of button. So let's save and see how our page looks like. But before we can do that, we need to compile the project. So I'm just going to run ng-serve. As you can see, our project has just finished compiling. So let's check it on the browser. So I'm going to open a new tab and run localhost 4200. And this is the button we created, but Angular by default comes with its own default UI templates for the landing page. So we need to clear everything we have right here in the app component.html file. So I'm just going to scroll to the app components HTML file, and I'm going to grab everything we have right there and clear it off. So once that is done, do not forget you need to have this router dash outlet in your app component. If you clear it off, your routing is not going to work. So I'm just going to save and then head back to the browser once again. As you can see, we now have this button called sign up with GitHub. So what I'm going to do is to open the console to see what is going to happen when we click on this button. I'm going to clear what we have right here and then click on sign up with GitHub, and it asks for authorization for me to be able to log in into the dashboard. So I'm going to click on authorize the sugar 10. As you can see, it navigates me to the dashboard and it says dashboard works, and you can see the auth service. It's console logging the session for this user, which contains the details, that is the username, the user ID, and every other important stuff you have in your object. And you should also take note of the status. It says it's signed in. And if you also check the application tab in our browser, you can see we have this particular key right here, and it's also persisting the data on our browser. So anytime you sign in with Supabase, that comes by default. So the final thing we want to do now is to inject some of these details into the navbar of our project. So quickly, I need to head straight to the app components HTML file. This is where we are going to do the navbar. So quickly, I can just create a navbar in Bootstrap by just typing in the nav tag and then attaching some classes or styles as the case may be. So I'm just going to say navbar. Another CSS class I need to add is called navbar-light to make a navbar light in color. And then finally the background, also I'm just going to give it a background of light. And then that's all we need to do for our navbar. Then we need to create a div also. So I'm going to create a div and it's going to have a class of container dash fluid, and then we need an a tag. So within the a tag, I'm going to call it navbar dash brand. So within the a tag, we need to call the name of our navbar. Probably I'm just going to name this dashboard. And next up, I would like to display a logout button as well as the name of the current logged in user. So to do that, I'm going to create a button, and this button is going to have a class of btn dash outline dash success, which means it's going to be green, and then we're going to give it a margin of 2 and it's going to be called logout. And then finally, this button is going to be wrapped in a form tag. So the form tag is going to be given a class of display flex, because we are going to have 2 items within this form tag. The first one is the button and the second one is the p tag that contains the details of the logged in users. So let's copy and paste the button within the form tag, and then finally let's create the p tag. So the p tag is going to have a class of text dash black as well as a margin left of 2, and then the name for now, let's just make it static test. So I'm just going to type in my name right there. So let's save and then let's see how the page currently looks. As you can see, we have the login button, the name as well as the name of the app on the navbar. So to make this dynamic, we want the name to come from the response when a user is logged in, as well as also display it when the user is logged in. So quickly to do that, we need to head to the app component.ts file. To get started in this components, all I need to do is to create the constructor, and within the constructor we need to inject the auth service. So all I need to do is just to say private auth, and then let's call the auth service and then inject it. And because we need to route to the sign up component anytime the user clicks on sign out button, so we need to inject the router. So all I need to do is just say private router and then inject the router. Then let's create the sign out function. So within this function, we have 2 things to implement. The first is the authentication created in our service. So what we have is this.auth.sign out. It's called sign out. We've already injected in our auth service, and then finally we can just say this.router.navigate, and then we can navigate to the / okay, it's going to be inside of a quote, so it's going to be / sign up. I think that's all we need to do to sign up. So I think we can test this, and to test this we need to make use of the click event handler. So in our button we can just make use of the click event handler, and then let's save everything we've done so far and let's see if it works. So I'm going to click on the logout button, but for some reasons it still logs us to the dashboard, and I think I know why that is. The button type is not specified, so this should be type. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to click on the logout button once more, but take note of the URL. You see a question mark at the end. That means the page is trying to reload. I mean, that's not the behavior we want. That would not allow our functionalities to work. So if I click on the logout, you can see the question mark at the end of the URL. That shouldn't be happening. So to fix that, let's just put a button type. So I'm going to say type of button. So that will get rid of that default behavior in our Angular application, and our logout should work successfully. So I'm going to click on logout, and you can see we've successfully logged out, and our current state shows signed out. So we are currently signed out from the application. Now, before we proceed, we need to get the current user data so that we can display the right name in the navbar. So to do that, we need to create our first signal. So if you don't know what signal is, it's a new implementation in Angular 16, and it's now fully implemented into Angular 17. So if you check the new documentation of Angular at angular.dev and you go to docs and you go to signals, you can see, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see some of the questions you might have been answered, like what are signals and what are writable signals, what's a computed signal. So you can see everything being answered in this documentation. So feel free to go through this documentation. And before I leave this page, one particular method we are going to make use of is called the set method. Basically, when you look at the explanation we have here, is just to change the value of a writable signal. That is, it helps us to update the value of a writable signal. So what do I mean by this? If I head back to the Visual Studio Code and I create a variable by saying user data, and I set that as a signal, because anytime you define a signal, all you need to do is just to call the signal, and it's gonna be an initial value of an object, an empty object, and you need to import it as well. So we need to import the signal at Angular core, just like we have right here. So that error disappears, and the implementation is going to be done within the constructor. So within the constructor, what we're going to do is we're going to say this.auth, because we're trying to get the details of the current user. So I'm going to reference the current user in our service file. Remember, we have a getter called current user, so we are going to subscribe to that. So I'm going to say .subscribe, and then it's going to return a callback, and we're going to pass in a argument of user, make use of the fat arrow, and within this callback we can have this dot user data, which is our signal, and we're going to set it to the current. In fact, before we proceed, I would like to log the user into the console to see how it comes, the shape in which it comes. So I'm going to save that, and let's check the browser, and within our app we can see we are currently signed out. So let's sign up once again and see the shape of the user we are logging into the console. So in our app components.ts file on line 19, you can see we have everything we need. So what we need specifically is just the name, and we can get that within the user metadata. So within the user metadata, you can see my full name is currently showing. So that's what we want to display on the nav bar. So to get access to that, we can just say this dot user data, which is a signal, and we can see the various methods available in signal. You have this symbol, you have apply, arguments, read only, but the one we need to make use of is the set. So because we want to set it to the new value, the current value is an empty object, but we want to set it to the new value. So what we can do is just to say user. I'm going to make use of optional chaining here to get rid of some errors. So it's going to be user.user metadata, user underscore metadata, and then we're going to say dot full name, because we're trying to get the full name. Just to be sure, I'm going to scroll up a bit. You can see full underscore name. So I'm just going to paste this right here, but we have an error. It says property full name comes from an index signature, so it must be accessed with a bracket notation, that is with a square bracket. So what we have to do, in fact, is to wrap the full name in a bracket notation like this, and with that the error gets to disappear. So now let's try to log the user data into the console. So all I can do is to say this dot user data, and then I'm gonna save. Let's see what shows in line 20. You can see the full name now shows in app component line 20. So what we need to do is just to display it on the nav bar. So to do that, let's head to the app components HTML file, and within the app component HTML file, what we can do is to wrap it around, make use of string interpolation by saying this dot user data, and it's going to take in a parenthesis here at the end. So let's save and check the nav bar to see if the name is now updated. As you can see, the name is now updated and it's showing on the nav bar. But before we complete the authentication part of this tutorial, I would like to conditionally render the logout button based on the login status. So to do that, I'm going to make use of the newly integrated @if block. So I'm just going to say @if, and then it's going to say taking an argument and whatever the argument is, and then we're going to pass it in. And then there's also the else block. So we're going to do it this way, but currently the else block is just going to be an empty tag. So I'm just going to put a string interpolation and create an empty string inside of that, and then I think this should be inside the form tag. So this should be here. So we can just cut the button and the p tag. So let's cut it right here, paste it inside the if block, and we have an error. We've not passed in the argument. What we want to say is if this dot user data, that is if the user is logged in, we want to show the button and the user's name. Else we want that particular tag to be empty. That's basically what we're trying to do. So let's save and see what shows on the browser. As you can see, we are currently logged in. If I click on logout, you can see the details on the navbar disappears because there's no user currently logged in. So that's what that at if and at else block is currently doing. I think it's a better syntax compared to the previous way of handling conditional statements by making use of the ngIf directive. So I think this is a much neater and much understandable format. So let's log in once again. As you can see, the navbar is now showing our full name as well as the logout buttons. And with that, we have come to the end of today's tutorial, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Stay blessed.